host of your webinar today, and I am one of the two moderators of the GBViE AOR Community of Practice. Many of you may be familiar with the AOR and the Community of Practice, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about us anyway. So today's webinar is, what do we mean by trauma-informed in gender-based violence work? So before we jump into that, let me first tell you a little bit about the Community of Practice. So we are part of the global GBViE AOR area of responsibility through the Global Protection Cluster. The Community of Practice, the COP, as it's also referred to, is a community of a virtual community of over 1,000 gender-based violence and emergency specialists all over the world. We have people in almost every emergency, as well as people that are joining us from headquarters, regional offices, and lots of women's-led organizations and local NGOs as well. We offer a virtual platform to provide support and to promote learning on gender-based violence and emergency. And we offer a series of webinars like this one that you're attending today. We also sometimes offer small courses, but mostly we offer peer-to-peer support. With over 1,000 specialists in our community, many of our members can reach out looking for materials, looking for support, asking questions, and just building their capacity. We have a number of other things we do as well, like we've compiled a compendium of training opportunities for gender-based violence and emergencies. And we have a Dropbox of different resources that have been shared by our members. So if you're interested and you're a member, you're an individual who works in gender-based violence and emergencies, why don't you drop us a line at gbvcop@gmail.com and think about joining. Again, you join as an individual, not through your organization. So as long as you're working in GBV and emergencies, you're welcome to come and join us. Our sister project is another thing we wanted to tell you about, which is the GBV AOR Help Desk. The Help Desk offers rapid technical advice and support for free. They can connect you with a GBV expert, and you can get support for any of your questions that you might have, and connect you to the right entities for your needs. They also produce evidence digests and guidance notes. You can find all of their information on the GBV AOR website. So just a couple of notes about the webinar today. This webinar will be recorded and will be shared with everyone who registered. We'll send you the link. You can find all of our webinars on the GBV AOR YouTube channel, and I'll send you the link to that in the chat later on. We'd like to ask you, we're only on for 75 minutes today, so we'd like to ask you to stay to the end and give us some feedback on a short poll that we'll launch. And as always, we will share all the PowerPoints from the webinar with you afterwards, as well as any materials that may get mentioned during the time. So we'll compile that and send it to you. We're always interested in your comments and thoughts, and you can always send us a message at gbvcop@gmail.com. A lot of the ideas for our webinars come from members asking, oh, I'd like to find more information on this. So if you have a topic that you'd really like to hear more about, contact us and we'll do the work to put one together for you. Okay, again, a couple of things about our chat today. Please put your questions in the chat. We will have time for question and answer with Sotieri and Claudia after their presentation. So please go ahead and put your questions in the chat and they will answer it for you. And if we can't get to all of your questions, we will continue the discussion in the community of practice. Sometimes if there are a lot of questions that come out, we do put together small Q&A summaries with the written responses to it. So don't be afraid to ask a question. Don't be afraid to put as many questions as you have in there, and we'll do our very best to get around to it. So now that I've gotten the boring questions and answer and housekeeping stuff out of the way, it's my pleasure to present to you our two speakers today. Claudia Zale is a workplace violence investigator and a counselor. I had the honor of working with her at the Resource and Safeguarding Hub, where she was doing some internal capacity building for us on trauma-informed, and came up with the idea of having her come and speak with you all today, because I think she really has a great way of presenting all this information. And she brought with her Sotieri Yim, who is a trauma expert from Cambodia, as well as a psychologist, psychotherapist, and peace builder. I am going to let them introduce themselves, and I'm not going to take up much more of your time. So without any further ado, let me please hand it over to Claudia and Saltieri.
Thank you, Saltieri. You want to start? No? Okay. Okay, so very warm welcome to all of you. So as Sarah said, my name is Claudia Zell. I'm German, and I'm a SEA investigator, workplace investigator, but also work on PSCA in general and safeguarding, and have been working on GBViE as well. So my first work on GBViE was in Bosnia, where I lived in a safety house with quite a lot of GBViE survivors for a couple of months. So this was a very, very deep learning experience. And that was also one of the reasons why I decided to become a counselor and work a lot on GBViE, with GBViE survivors, on trauma. And that's a bit why I got interested in the whole trauma informed approach, and that's where I am right now. And I don't want to talk any further because we have so little time and there's so much to tell you. So I hand it over to Saltieri.
Hi, you hear me? Yes. Okay, cool. I just another part of introducing myself. Sarah did really well on that. So I after working on with survivors for nearly 20 years, I now have a courage to create my own center. Thanks to the stories, experience and story I heard from our survivors, I have the courage to create my own center here based in Phnom Penh. Who's that? To you, Claudia.
Thank you, Sarah. I move on. I start to share my screen. Yes?
Yes, please. Thank you.
All right, let me share my screen. Okay. You should see it now. Everybody can see it well?
Yes, it looks great. Thank you.
Perfect. So a very warm welcome again to our very important webinar on the trauma-informed approach, especially in GBViE programs, GBViE in emergencies. And we thought about, together with Saltieri, how can we best introduce this to you in a very limited amount of time, because we could spend days and weeks talking about the trauma-informed approach and have really a deep dive. So this is unfortunately not going to happen today, but we will give you as much as possible information, and we will also give you a lot of practical experiences by Saltieri and her work in Cambodia, which is always the most important when we talk about these approaches, that they don't just stay a nice theory, but really how can we operationalize them. So our agenda for today is I will give you a very brief overview, a bit of the historical aspects of the trauma-informed approach and the principles of the approach and the importance of adaptation and contextualization. And then I will lead over to Saltieri, and she will share her practical examples. We have time for questions. For both of us, it's really important in terms of methodology that we engage in a dialogue. We are around 60 participants, so I think it's a number that is still manageable. So Sarah and Jiva will also monitor the chat, so please always feel free during the whole session to put your thoughts in the chat. We will address it, put your questions in the chat, raise your hands if you have a comment on a particular topic that we say, so really to have this as a bit of an engaging session, even though it's not a small number of participants. So I will start briefly with the overview. So what is the history of the trauma-informed approach? So the development of the trauma-informed practice, and this is how it was referred to as practice, can be traced back to the United States and the groundbreaking work of Maxime Harris and Roger Fallett, and also Sandra Bloom. They are all psychologists, psychiatrists from the United States. So it comes from a westernized society. It's something that we need to mention, is really important. And it was developed in the 1990s and the early 2000s in the healthcare sector. So if you look at the dates, it's around 30 years old. Yeah, so it's not something that has been developed in the previous years. It's something that has been there for around 30 years and even longer without being called like that. And why the healthcare sector? And I think it's also important to understand a bit the roots of that approach, is that many healthcare practitioners, they had experienced among their clients, among their patients, that healthcare centers or hospitals can be a terrifying experience, yeah, for someone who might had or is still going through traumatic events. So they did a survey and they saw that patients and clients perceived huge power differentials by being asked, for example, to remove their clothes, and having invasive examinations, by being alone in a room as a female patient with a male practitioner. And that this has led to an understanding that services really need to be delivered in ways that prevent patients from being re-traumatized, from being anxious about medical visits, and eventually then also avoiding them, which cause even further harm. And this is a bit why the whole idea of being trauma-informed was developed, and I think is really crucial to understand. Based on that model, the trauma-informed practice is now widely understood, and I will read out the definition as it is used, but of course you also find definitions that are slightly different, yeah? So it's a strength-based framework that is grounded in an understanding of and responsiveness to the impact of trauma, that emphasizes physical, psychological, and emotional safety for both providers and survivors, and that creates opportunities for survivors to rebuild a sense of control and empowerment. And if we just look for 1 second on that definition, we already see quite a lot of principles that I will share with you in a bit. As you see, it's a strengths-based framework, and that's something that we really, really need to have as an attitude, to understand as an attitude that is underlying or that underpins that trauma-informed practice. It's really about safety, but not just about physical safety. It's about emotional safety. It's about psychological safety. And it is also not, in brackets, about just the clients and the survivors. It's about the providers as well. It's about you, for example, as GBViE practitioners, that also should work in an environment that is safe, because of course you could also be impacted by traumatic experiences, being by the stories that you hear every day, being by your own history. So it really looks at the providers and the clients at the same time. And I think that's something that is really crucial. It has then also be further developed. As with every approach, new elements come in. You know, our world is not standing still. So also these approaches get expanded. So there was practitioners mainly in Canada who looked at the trauma-informed practice, and they felt it was lacking something very crucial. And they included the term violence. So you find sometimes in literature that it's called trauma and violence informed approach. And why is that? It's because they consider also ongoing structural violence, such as discrimination, racism, and all other forms of oppression, as phenomena that could also cause trauma. And that's why it is so important that we also consider that daily experiences of being discriminated, be it based on your belonging, be it based on your sexual identity, be it based on your physical appearance, is also something that leads to traumatic experiences that can have very similar consequences than surviving sexual assault, for example. So that's why you find this very often, that this term violence is also incorporated. And despite the growing also international interest, so the trauma-informed approach really then kind of moved also or found its way into the humanitarian and development sector. And there is a huge interest, which we also saw in the amount of people that shared their or that showed their interest in that webinar. It can seem a bit fuzzy, the approach, a bit complex. And there are service providers who feel, but that's already what we are doing. So why do we need an approach telling us, that's what we do as social workers, as counselors? But it's much more than that. And people also said, but it's an approach that tells us a bit to be nicer. And it's not that. It's not about being nice. Of course, we are nice to our clients, we are nice to our colleagues, but it's much, much more than that, because it's an approach that has a huge potential to actually lead to a fundamental shift in how public services are organized and delivered. And the more we know about this, the more human we can develop and do these services. It's really like a paradigm shift from thinking what has happened or what we used to think in the past. So what is wrong with you, to considering what has happened to you and gain a better understanding of the past and the present of people we engage with, be it colleagues or be it project participants. And human services and GBV services do very much fall into that. We need to do the opposite of trauma. We need to move from fear to safety, from control to empowerment, and from abuse of power to accountability and transparency. And that's the most important thing. We also need to understand that there is a difference between trauma-informed and trauma-specific interventions. And sometimes it gets mixed up, and there's a huge difference. The trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive approaches, they do not aim to treat symptoms associated with trauma, but rather prioritize the psychological and physical safety of individuals. It's really not about diagnosing someone and becoming the therapist or the counselor. It's trauma-informed really means to understand that there's a high prevalence in our world that people might have gone through traumatic experiences, and that might explain why people behave in a way that they behave. But it's not about diagnosing them. Trauma informed in GBV in emergencies. So again, the trauma-informed approach is only one component of a multi-level or multi-sectional model to respond and to prevent gender-based experiences of violence. The prevalence of trauma and GBV within these populations, and when I say these populations, I mean the populations in emergencies, because that's what we are looking at, is highly complex and multifaceted. We have GBV and displacement, which is very important to see, because also displacement as such, without experience in gender-based violence, can be traumatic. We have armed conflict, the same thing, and Sotiri will also talk about it when she shares her example of working with survivors of gender-based violence during the genocide, but also in current Cambodia. GBV, and you all know that, I'm not telling you anything new here, encompasses a high range of physical, sexual, emotional, and economic abuses that are deeply intertwined with power imbalances, societal norms, and cultural expectations. GBV survivors, and that's also my experience from my time in Bosnia, but also in Congo, they often face very intersectional challenges, such as racism, economic disparities, discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So it's highly complex because all these little components that I mentioned, they themselves, even without surviving or experiencing sexual assault or gender-based violence, can pose traumatic experiences on human beings. There's cultural dynamics that further complicate the issue, and in war and post-conflict regions, or ongoing insecurity, endangerment, and poverty, and in the case of rape, of course, also stigmatization, social exclusion, they can all exacerbate the traumatic stress reactions. I saw someone with a red line. Now it's gone. I wasn't sure if you wanted to underline something. So trauma informed in GBV and emergencies is really about having a fundamental attitude that is stress and trauma sensitive. Yeah, so GBV survivors in war and post-conflict areas, they will seek support and assistance at social, economic, and legal levels, yeah, as well as psychological and physical health. So the assistance that they seek is widespread. And the stress, trauma-sensitive, trauma-informed approach can be applied at these different levels, even where the issue at hand are not clinical and medical, yeah, and the actual traumatic experience is not the focus of the consultation or assistance. So that's really important, because that's sometimes where the misunderstanding comes in, that people think, I don't need to be trauma-informed because I only offer legal advice, or I offer economic programs for GBV survivors. I'm not engaging with them on a psychological level. So that's often where people get a bit confused, that nevertheless, they should be trauma informed in all the project activities that they are running. It's also something that is very crucial for teams. And it can support organizations that can be affected by trauma dynamics. And I have worked last year extensively with many CSOs, civil society organizations in Northeast and Northwest Syria and in Yemen. And I could tell that there were a lot of psychologists, social workers that do work with gender-based violence survivors, but they themselves have suffered a lot during the years of war, during the natural disaster and the earthquake. So they are not immune just because they are social workers. They also have their own history, and it is really important for an organization to apply trauma-informed as an organizational culture and take their own staff also into account and apply the same principles that we will see in a bit, not only to the clients, but also to their own staff. Because we need to consider also vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, which is relatively common among us in the humanitarian sector, and which gets easily overlooked, because when we work in emergencies, our objective is to be of support for the people that are at risk, and we often forget ourselves. And I think all of us who have worked in these emergencies who know this very well. So the guiding principles. The guiding principles, and this is really important, it is a set of principles, and they are also widely recognized, but they should never be understood as, let's say, a rigid framework. Yeah, it's really more about to be aware and to incorporate in your work the underlying attitudes, yeah, and really also contextualize it and apply it to your own work environment. So that's really something beautiful also about this approach, that is not very rigid. Yeah, but it allows for a lot of adaptation. There used to be 5 principles. There are 6 principles, and especially the last principle, the 6th one, is one that particular for Sotiri and myself is very important. So I will share them with you now. So the first one is safety. Yeah, I think that's very clear. We already saw this in the definition. So throughout the organization, staff and the people they serve should feel physically and psychologically and emotionally safe. It's also about the physical setting. Yeah, so if you work, let's say, as a medical practitioner in a health center, or you offer clinical rape management in emergencies, you need to also consider, how does the environment look? Is someone who is coming into a health center feel comfortable and safe? And sometimes it's just the color of the wall and how the whole environment looks. And then it's also about the interactions, interpersonal interactions, and do they promote a sense of safety? How am I welcomed in this center? Yeah, so it's really sometimes about these little things that can make a huge difference. And it's also about having reasonable freedom from threat or harm and attempts to prevent further re-traumatization. It's about trustworthiness, the second principles. So transparency exists in an organization's policies and procedures, yeah, with the overall objective of building trust among staff, yeah, among your colleagues, but also among the clients and the wider community. Yeah, so this is also where sometimes then the feedback mechanisms come in, but also being clear on your values, on your procedures. So that's really, really important. Then the third one is choice. Yeah, and that's crucial because during, let's say, sexual assaults, people have no choice. Yeah, and they feel powerless. So it's something that needs to be given to them through the services. So it's really, really important that they have a meaningful choice, that they also have a voice in decision making. So they are the ones deciding what services they want, in which way, when to start and when to stop. And that's also where the informed consent comes in, because of course we also do a lot about qualitative research when it comes to GBV. It's very important also when I do SEA investigations, that's the most important, that people not just consent or approve, but they are informed throughout the process, and at any time of the process, be it services or be it investigations, they can withdraw their consent, and it's their choice. The fourth one is collaboration. Yeah, so that's also important, because that's something that is also for you, yeah, as practitioners, that it's an approach that is really recognizing the value of your input as staff, similarly like the client's experience in overcoming challenges and improving then eventually the whole system. And that's very often operationalized in practice, what I saw, either through formal or informal use of peer support or mutual self-support. Empowerment, another principle. So the efforts are made by an organization to really share power, to give clients and you as staff a strong voice in decision making at both individual and organizational level. So it's really also about you being able to bring in your experience and to bring in your thoughts as practitioners, and then the whole management team and the organization as such should also value that and value your input. And the last one, very important also for Sotiri and myself, is cultural, historical, and gender. So really moving past cultural stereotypes and biases, be it based on race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, age, religion, spirituality, gender identity, you name it, there are many, many more, and offer access to gender responsive services, having policies, protocols, and processes that are responsive to racial, ethnic, and cultural needs of individuals. And that's where the whole importance of adaptation and contextualization comes in. Because as I said at the beginning, the approach was developed in a very westernized country. And we need to take this into consideration, that there is particular understandings of trauma in particular regions of the world, and they are not always the same. And it can be challenging sometimes when we work with the concept or the terminology of trauma, because there are so many misconceptions, there are so many misunderstandings. It's a word that is used in our all-day life by a lot of people who might not always have the full picture what it actually means, and then it easily gets misunderstood. And particularly when referring also to possible signs and symptoms of traumatic experiences and their treatment. And there's a lot of reference always made, which is very much shaped by westernized mental health concepts, such as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, which we all use, and which is very much linked between traumatic experiences and the PTSD. It always immediately pops up in our mind. However, in many circumstances in which humanitarians and also development operations take place, traumatic experiences are very much repetitive and ongoing, and they continue, and there is no such thing as a post phase. And I have worked with a psychiatrist in Pakistan, and she sometimes got furious because she said, you know, it's not surviving a car accident and going home and be safe and work through what has just happened to me. It's like people are constantly in an environment that creates traumatic experiences, and there is no post phase for many, many people. And we need to stop talking about PTSD, because a huge amount of the population worldwide cannot recover, as westernized mental health concepts suggest. Yeah, so trauma may be experienced or expressed also very differently across diverse cultural backgrounds. Yeah, so there is a very westernized approach by talking through your experiences, but other cultures don't talk through. They find other ways of dealing with it, and we need to take this serious, and we need to also learn about it much more. Yeah, so learn about religious beliefs, traditional healing practices, and take them very serious. Yeah, and also consider the wider spectrum and the community support system, because trauma does not only happen at an individual level, and Sotiri will talk about this, and it's really, really important to recognize the cultural differences. There was also sometimes a bit of confusion. What is trauma-informed versus survivor-centered, survivor-led, survivor-focused? And there's a lot of confusion sometimes going on. But it's unnecessary. There's no need for confusion. Yeah, these two approaches, they are not contradictory. They're very much complementary. In my personal point of view, they should always be applied simultaneously. And as you can see, I did a little graph. You can see safety is the key principle in both these approaches. It's really about keeping people safe. And then you see words such as respect, non-discrimination, confidentiality, and the survivor-centered approach. And you find those terms also in the trauma-informed, be it in the trustworthiness or trust, being it enjoys non-discrimination. You find it in culture, history, and gender, empowerment. So it's different terms, and I wouldn't say they are not the same, of course. You know, is the survivor-centered approach is pretty much focused on a survivor, on the individual. Yeah, whilst the trauma-informed approach is an organizational culture. It's a bit more broader. It looks at prevalences of trauma at a much higher level than the individual. Yeah, so this needs to be taken into consideration, but it really has to be applied simultaneously. and they have similar objectives. They don't want to cause further harm, and they want to prevent re-victimization and re-traumatization. And during SCA investigations, for example, we apply them simultaneously. So now I stop talking and I hand over to Sutiri, and please always use the chat. We have Sarah and Shiva monitoring it. And I hand over to you, Sutiri, for practical experiences that you made in Cambodia. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you. Good afternoon from Cambodia, everyone. And good from here. Good afternoon and good morning to, I think most of you are good morning there. I'll try to be quick because like we always want to also have a chat with you. You also can throw some question to us as well. And always watch the clock, Claudia. Always tell me, okay. First, I want to really add a little bit to what Claudia mentioned because it's so relational to me. I heard this a lot as well when people say, I don't need trauma informed because I'm not a clinical psychologist. I'm not a social worker who work directly with survivors. And actually, you said it clear already that everyone needs it. We suffer or we receive and we suffer in a different form, more or less, okay? And why it is important to me as well, Claudia and colleagues here, being trauma-informed, when you work in this field, it's for them, it's for you, I mean for us, for our society, and actually for the world we live together. It's not just for a lot of time we think, oh, yes, I need to work, I need to be informed. Some of them say, I need to be informed because I want to work well with my survivor. I want to work well for my projects. This is not enough. This is not enough. Because I often say, you are the best tool to work in your field. And if we are not taking care of ourselves, we tend to, how can I say that? We can become a perpetrators. We can become a perpetrators when we work so much in the trauma context. It comes to us. It's becoming also an invisible wound to us. Perpetrator in different form, or at least if the word perpetrator is too strong, at least the word we can also harm somebody else. Especially a lot of times our family members and our closest person. So again, take care of yourself. Trauma, there is a great definitions and explanations from one of the well-known trauma therapists. He said trauma is he said what happens after the experience of trauma is really crucial here when we want to talk about when we want to deal with it. Because if we are strong enough to deal with the event, we don't experience all the symptoms of trauma or PTSD. When it comes to gender, for me, it's unfortunate that so far from the experience and observe, not just Cambodia, but other process of dealing with the conflict and especially from the past. GBV, trauma-informed, especially the GBV in itself, is often comes after many others. Just a specific example. Cambodian, the Atropathy, the Cambodian, the hybrid courts here, established like physically established in 2006. Like they start, we having courtrooms and all of this. And they start with different form of investigations, but only mid-2010, the court start to address GBV that happened in the Khmer Rouge. So 4-year-ish already, this is being addressed. So this is also why I want to be part of this webinar, because like this has to be prioritized, like kick it up a little bit, not just like let's prioritize it. And even in the court here, rape is not, can I say that? It's not prosecuted. It's not officially, or it's not prosecuted in the Khmer Rouge tribunal here. The gender-based violence is prosecuted here only in the form of forced marriage. There, but rape outside of marriage, courts not consider to bring to trials. Even this is happening. Getting back to a little bit of the sixth principle. I have learned all of this when I joined developing this book. I worked in the fields since 2006 when the tribunals start here. 23 years old, jumping into the fields. If I can give a metaphor, I felt like I'm not being trained to swim, but somebody pushed me to the river just to learn to swim. And this is how I can describe myself when I'm not trauma informed. I experience insomnia. I experience a lot. I as a younger generations of the crime, Khmer Rouge, I sometimes dreams of having my hair short like the women who live in the Khmer Rouge. Somebody chased me, and all of this happening during the not informed period. I also later, I think I describe it as also a burnout. I changed my career a little bit. I shift my career a little bit to work on something else, a little bit more specific, giving therapy, counseling and therapy to also another form of survivor, gender-based violence, working with girls who suffer trafficking, sexual exploitations, and it's another push for me to the river again. So re-experience burnout again. And I and team created this book, published in only 2020. So it's long year after I realized that, yes, this is needed. These days, I try to give a lot of this and bring it into a lot of part of my works, especially working with people who I can approach is, or who those to approach me is are people who works in trafficking, people who works in supporting survivor. But again, a lot of them are still social workers and psychologists, not yet people from the court, not yet people from this ministry or that ministry approach me and invite me for to talk and share and train on trauma informed. This topic need to be, again, continue speaking about it and continue practicing. Again, this is just for us, for ourselves, for them. Otherwise, we will just again repeat it. It's just a different form. We're still repeating. Violence still continue, maybe slightly different. Yep, I hope our community continue this as a process of part of our work. There are also a little bit more of misconceptions is that, yes, I've been trained, so it's good. Train is not yet enough. It's not enough. A continuation of practicing it. Having a community like us is also a really good, but also work on yourself, or more often, not just working for others. This picture, Claudia, get back. This remind me of 10 years ago. That's also one of example that you described so far about the consents. Yeah, about the consents. Conscience and inclusions is really important here. I'm here to answer the questions, especially more in depth into the experience of Cambodian context. Yes.
Okay, great. We have a couple of questions already in the chat, and I would just encourage everyone to go ahead and put any other questions that you have in there, because we've got about 30 minutes to be able to discuss. I'm going to combine the first two questions because I think that they might be able to start you both thinking. The first one was, how can we make our GBV services trauma informed? Do you have any like practical guidance? And then Alma, that was from Alessandra Rossi, and Alma Pezorovich also asked, in a society where people are generally reluctant to verbally discuss or express their feelings about traumatic events, what methods and tools have you found effective in working with them? So let me put that to you both, and then in the meantime, we'll look for more questions, and we'll answer Kashif's very intriguing question as well.
Yeah, maybe I quickly start on how can we make GBV programs more trauma informed, and it's a very important question. Similarly, we often ask ourselves, how can we make our programs in general more safe and more trauma informed? And I think, as I said, it always has to start, I would say, with a proper analysis of where am I, in which context do I work, what is the prevalence of GBV, and what forms of GBV are we experiencing in this particular country or in this particular context. Do we have a high prevalence of domestic violence or intimate partner violence? Do we have a high prevalence of forced marriage? Do we have a high prevalence of trafficking, of prostitution, of sexual exploitation? Do we find a high prevalence of child abuse because maybe the legal age is defined maybe lower than 18? And I remember also when I came to Cambodia and started to work, and I was reading a lot that, for example, during the peacekeeping mission after the genocide and Vietnam occupation, so many humanitarian workers came into Cambodia, into a country, and Sujiri, please respond also to that. And they had nothing else to do than continue exploiting children. And it was one of the very first cases that we saw when we started to talk about PSCA. So how can we make this more safe? I think it really starts with a proper risk assessment, a proper risk analysis, that we do not just copy paste from one project to another, that we really invest a lot of time in understanding the circumstances in which we work. And then we can see, okay, with whom am I engaging? Are my GBV services more health related? Are they more economic programs? Are they more psychological support? Or what am I actually doing? And then looking at what could maybe trigger people to be anxious to use the services that we offer. And I think the most important is to include participants in the design. It's not us making it more trauma informed. It's going into a participatory approach and asking the people themselves, what do they need in order to feel comfortable accessing the services that are there. And I think that's what is important. And sometimes our proposals, we need to write them in a rush, because there are deadlines. There is also donors that tell us a little bit what to do. But I think we really, really need to invest a lot of time in understanding the context, understanding the risks, and understanding what people actually need. And I know it's probably not a very satisfactory answer, because we always aim for having a nice checklist and then going through. But I think when we really want to be trauma informed, we need to basically invest in understanding. And so Thierry, I give to you to also answer from your end.
Okay, thank you. I won't repeat this. I'm very happy with your answer, Claudia. So just a quick example to that. Because you mentioned the assistance, the humanitarian assistance and aids back to after the war end. I a lot recently dealing with and healing with support the healing with a lot of younger generations who is the son and daughter of those people you mentioned. Some of the some of them describe their trauma experience as, like, one of them, just example, his dad, his father was somebody who used in one of the UN agency back to those years. A very great guy, respected by community, because, like, back to the 80 and 90, work in UNs and all of these are really, really somebody. But the traumas that his children, who's my client now, describe is just like horror. It's horror. He sometimes, like, pushed, when he forced the son to study, he pushed his head and it, with the mirrors, and he cut, like, until now he had, like, the cuts on his face and all of that. And that's what I got really emotional again. I'm speaking about this story. Like, you work with people who is really difficult, it always comes to you. That's why to start making change of others, you need to change yourself. If you realize that, oh, I got tired from this, and then start. And I believe that if every one of us start, we have a bigger voice with caring, Yeah. Okay. So
And
can we?
yeah, to add briefly on this, also when it comes to the programming aspect, I think one important element is also to focus, especially when we talk about GBV in armed conflict or war, that we also look at male survivors, because we do have a tendency, because the statistics and the research is more on female survivors. But there is a lot of male survivors as well. And I remember during my time in Bosnia, when I lived in the safety house, many of the women that were there living with me for 6 months, they suffered from intimate partner violence. And they suffered it from their husbands who just got back from years of war in former Yugoslavia. And they themselves had experienced a lot of trauma, killing people, but also being sometimes sexually assaulted by other male soldiers. So they came back home and there was no system for male survivors at all, because it was a society, or it still is a society, where is so much stigmatized to talk about rape among men that the male survivors would never ever come forward.
Yes.
Be it because of homophobe societies, be it about so much shame, but they had no support system at all. And
yes.
It happened that they then, as Thierry also said at the beginning, they became violent themselves. And it's a very normal reaction. And that also then caused additional gender-based violence in the form of domestic and intimate partner violence, because of the lack of services. And I'm not going to defend what they have done to their wives, because I know all of their stories, but I just wanted to say GBV programs, we really need to start incorporating male survivors, and look at it in a more holistic way.
Thanks for that, Claudia and Satieri. There's a lot of conversation coming in on the chat now. I'm sensing a real desire for any practical guidance or resources that people can go to, or any trainings on how to incorporate this trauma-informed approach to that. Is there anything that you are familiar with or know of? And again, we can, if you yourselves, people in the chat, have things that you found useful, please write it down in the chat and we can compile all of these for the community of practice. So Claudia Saltieri, do you know of any actual good guidance or trainings?
Yes, so what we can definitely share is some material. There's quite a lot of, let's say, self-assessment tools in how trauma-informed are you as an organization. It's something that you can go through on a more organizational level. So that's something we can definitely share. There is a training that I can also share, but that's more for human rights monitoring, and particularly then on sexual violence in armed forces and how to engage with survivors in research and interviewing. So that's something that's a free of charge course that you can do by a colleague of mine who's also a Canadian psychologist trained in trauma-informed interviewing. That's something we can share. We can also share some articles on how to do trauma-informed qualitative research. Yeah, so, and I think important for the trauma-informed is really then to take the bits of all of those materials and create your own kind of tool set, because as I mentioned, it's an approach that is not very rigid. And it allows for a lot of adaptation, which is also crucial. So, but these are elements we can definitely share with you. So Thierry, maybe you have some additional points you want to make?
Before answering these questions, I think there was also a questions about trauma-informed and trauma treatment. There's like, it's come across my eye. I just want to say that you can do, every one of us can train or can do trauma-informed, and they are, or you are not necessary to do trauma treatment. Trauma treatment is in my opinion, if I can say this, like it's more another level of treating the memory. Yeah, treating the memory. And while trauma-informed is for awareness, so you can have a bigger picture, preparations to yourself. You can also learn first aid in there. You can also learn a little bit how to support in the first hand, but trauma treatment is another level. Yeah, for treating the memory. Treating the memory. And treating the memory here is also means treating the depression, treating the anxiety that our client have, etc. So just a different level. Yeah, and trauma treatment is often trained, it is often done by a trained professional psychologist, psychotherapist, and psychiatrist, yes. And when it comes to trauma-informed, I think one of our colleagues in Heinrich Böll Foundations in Beirut also trying to adopt the model we have in Cambodia, and to contextualize to their works as well. So contextualize is important. We cannot just only take one and apply for all. Trainings is often, I think Claudia and I also do sometimes also a tailor programs on this as well.
And I just wanted to let you know that we'll be sharing Claudia and Saltieri's contact information as well, so that you can reach out to them directly to get more information. But I wanted to, when you were talking about context, Kashif Faruqi had an interesting question. He said the addition of the word violence in the trauma and violence informed approach reflects inclusion of other forms of trauma, such as that based on racial and other forms of discrimination. How can we decolonize our response approaches, especially in the context of Indigenous communities, as a lot of their trauma is rooted in colonization? Big question, just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
So Thierry, you want to?
Yes, it is a big question that I really don't have the answer, honestly, but I would, when it comes to colonizing and all of this trauma or violence, it's a lot about power. And every one of us, do we dare to give up power just to be harmony and to be peaceful? I can only say that.
No, it's very true. It's very true, and it's a very great question, and it's something that, again, as also Soteria mentioned at the beginning, we really, before we can change a whole system, we really need to start with us, and we really need to look at how do we behave and how do we design programs and how do we do our job as an individual. And there is a lot of these discussions in the humanitarian sector that many of us who've been there since 20 years also at some point get frustrated or get tired, because there's a lot of things that come, such as localization, decolonization, and there's all these big words. But as Sotiri rightfully said, the sector as such, and I think we need to be also very honest, is also a business. And many people don't want to give up power because it would mean that they have to change. And changing is a huge thing for many people who are used to work in a particular way. And but you are completely right with your question and what you say, because we really need to look into, for example, what Indigenous communications go through, and how is their traumatic experience, how do they manifest, and what do they need in order to work and deal with it. And as I said, it's really about using also approaches like this to adapt and to contextualize and to dive deep into these particular communities and try to understand it also deeper. For me, it's really about mutual learning and less using all these kind of big words, but really interact on an individual level with the person and try to understand what that person really needs in order to recover, in order to heal, to whatever they would define it. But I also don't have the question on how to decolonize this, because that's really big. But I think the trauma-informed can also be used as a tool to deeper understand what colonization has done over so many centuries. And I think all of us have lived in many colonized countries or come from colonized countries. And I think it's really about dialogue and engaging with each other.
Hi, sorry. We had a couple of other questions as well. One that just popped in was, do you have any advice or observations on doing trauma-informed care for LGBTQI communities?
So Thierry, I give to you, because me personally, I haven't worked in that particular sector, so I would not feel comfortable giving advice, even though on a theoretical level I would. But I would ask you, Sotiri, if you have worked with LGBTQI+ community.
Yes. I in my practice, I would say 99% of my clients are female, and our friends and our friends from the LGBTIQ community, less male. So I work with them individually, and I'm glad that these days there are a lot of I don't know if we can call this a movement, but there are a lot of voice from them raised and addressed, and also some donor interest in this. So just recently, I worked with one or two organizations preparing to give a trauma informed for them, for the organizationals. Individual levels, for the individual levels, I think it is needed when I work individual levels, and I address it to the funding community as well. A lot of people from the community that came to me because they suffer discriminations. They, again, coming back to what I said earlier, you tend to also to harm something else. Again, I don't want to use the word becoming a perpetrator, maybe it's a strong word, but discrimination, when you create a victims, that means you also create perpetrators and more victims. For the community, LGBTIQ, they suffer from family, from their own blood, and also community. So a lot of time they suffer double or triple. They do need trauma informed when they work with their peers. And they also do need trauma therapy. Yes, if we don't work in ourselves, me or them or Claudia, the balls keep rolling. And when you touch something else, it's also the others also get it. Again, just coming back into what I focus the most is work on ourselves. Yeah.
And maybe to add, because I did had once an investigation that involved a survivor that was not binary. And what I remember from that very conversation was that, and I think that's something that trauma informed needs to consider, is that the person felt he deserved it because of being not normal and not being part of the society, and being from a very early age on being told that you are not normal. And then it was like she perceived the violence that happened as a consequence of not being what religion in that particular country was Uganda, told them how a good Christian should be. So in order to work with communities of different sexual orientation in countries where the legal legislation is very homophobe and very religiously driven, we need to incorporate also trauma-informed trainings for faith-based leaders, because it starts there. Because if we do not raise awareness in a community that it is your choice to choose your sexual orientation, we won't move forward very much. Because then what happens, yes, we have them in single therapy sessions, if they come forward at all. Because if it is a crime in many countries, people wouldn't dare to tell you. And it's sometimes, let's say, maybe us as investigators, foreigners that come in, that we hear, but it's also our mandate is to do an investigation. Our mandate is not to raise community awareness, but I think that's the very little experience I can share, that it really requires training with faith-based organization, faith-based leaders, to have them as your allies, to really change the conception that something is wrong with you because you're not falling into.
Thanks for that, Claudia. And we only have about 7 minutes left in the webinar, and there were a couple of questions about self-care for frontline workers. And I wanted to just let everyone know that at the GBViE AOR, we've been working with Paula Ramirez, who on trauma-informed stress reduction and mindfulness-based courses for GBViE frontline workers. She's also been doing a lot of this work with GBViE coordination groups. Do Do you both have any practical tips of how we could embed trauma-informed work into our organizations and into our own self-care and our support for our staff and ourselves as well?
So Thierry?
I thought I hand this to you. Okay, self-care, one word that we almost everyone know this is that if you take care of yourself, means you give the best of yourself, not the worst of yourself. Yeah, take care of yourself, that means you give the best of yourself. Self-care is often used as a buzzword. I don't know, but here a lot, and people take self-care into a way that, oh, I can be lazy. I can but just be lazy. Lazy, it's also fine, but people just take it in a way that is like, how can I say, it's a bit of extreme. That's why when I do self-care program here, I try not to use the word self-care, but I try to use the smaller words, like I break it into how's your sleeps and how's your sleep and eat habits, how's your exercise habits, etc. So we talk about that instead of the word like self-care in itself. Yeah, that's what I do here and a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what I do is I have just finished, and don't perceive this as an advertisement. It's really not what I mean. But I just developed a training for Osako, where I work also as a consultant, mainly doing trainings on investigation. But I think it similarly can be used for many other GBV practitioners, and it's about how to behave in emotionally challenging conversations, but also how to take care of yourself, as Thierry mentioned, to be able to do that job. And I think, again, here, what we are trying to do is in that particular training to support individuals to get to know their own window of tolerance, get to know their own stressors, get to know what is triggering them, and then also define a journey. What are small little things that you can do that help you on a daily level? And it's sometimes extremely simple. Yeah, so it can be going for a walk if that's possible. And as an organization, and I think that's also where the question maybe is going to a bit, is it's an organizational responsibility to have a proper duty of care and staff well-being policy in place. And that's sometimes what is lacking, because especially as a social worker, as a GBV practitioner, as an SEAH investigator, people don't take care of yourself, and they think you need to do this yourself, but you're part of an organization and it's their duty of care. So it's part of an organizational culture. And I think what we said is a lot about peer support. It's a lot about recognizing when you are at the edge. It's a lot about knowing when it's time to take a break. And then the organization should allow you to take that break. Me, for example, I was always lucky. I always got supervision. So whenever I had a difficult investigation, my organization offered me supervision sessions with an external person that I could select.
Yes,
so that's something that is important.
And this is something that we really care about here at the GBViE AOR Community of Practice. We also had a webinar about a year and a half back, I think, about the importance of supervision. I myself went through a burnout, and I would rather see people get some prevention and some care than go through it and try to recover, I have to say. I'm going to have to draw a close to our discussion right now. There's a lot of really interesting chat in the discussion, and I will send you both Claudia and Thierry the chat so that if there's something we want to respond to in writing, we can post it back on the Community of Practice. In the meantime, I'm going to ask everyone if they don't mind answering our little evaluation poll for us. We would appreciate that. And I'd like to take the moment to thank you both for making yourself available and coming together with us at the Community of Practice. Very good turnout today. We had almost 100 people come at some point. So I think there's more room to talk about this in the future, and I would invite everyone to join us on the Community of Practice. You can send us a message at the GBV AOR Community of Practice, gbvcop@gmail.com, and we will be happy to send you information and put you in touch with Claudia and Saltieri. Again, we'll be sharing the recording link and the PowerPoints and some of the materials that were discussed today. If you have any materials that you think you would like us to share, please also feel free to send it to us in the email. And thank you again, Claudia and Saltieri, for sharing your expertise and your wisdom and your guidance with us. We're very, very grateful. All right, that's it for us today. So thank you all, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.